Why do these Pokemon cheat death? Ever since the first generation, Pokemon has danced through life, death, and revival. Our first direct interaction with it being the spirit of a Marowak, protecting its Cubone Child, which eventually became something far more powerful through Alolan Marowak. In fact, there are many Pokemon who are revived in a new, almost living form, such as Spiritomb, a collection of 108 evil spirits sealed within the odd keystone. The tragic deaths in Relic Castle that created Yamask, and Phantump, who is the ghost of a child who got lost in a forest and perished. But each of these Pokemon had a different life, some sort of great event or tragedy that then transformed them into new living forms, as they now continue to wander the world with a second chance and a new purpose. The pinnacle of this are the Pokemon who perished in the burning of Brass Tower, only to be revived by Ho-Oh as the Legendary Beasts Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Pokemon that are now greatly celebrated as they were reborn in new, more powerful bodies that summon thunder, volcanoes, and cleanse the waters of the world. Howdy there, I'm Krillix, and welcome to the final video of 2025. I wanted to do something fun that represents the idea of leaving the year behind as something new is created. Plus, there are tons of inspirations behind these Pokemon that I have not fully explored and I learned new information regarding. Because within our world of Pokemon, there are many different creatures that have fallen before their time was truly up. Zora, who are hunted to extinction within Hisui, Cubone, who are often attacked by Team Rocket or its natural predator Mandibuzz, and even soldiers whose souls have come back from the afterlife to possess a sword, then creating Honedge. In fact, many ghost Pokemon in specific find themselves being the result of a tragic death, though what they do in their new life shapes who they are and the love that they have received, like Literal Greavard and Houndstone, who are deeply loved by lore standards, and that love contributes to their evolution. So let's explore all of these Pokemon, their backstories, how their tragic fate affects their new forms, and end with the power of Ho-Oh itself. Now, we will be jumping around quite a bit in the Pokédex just to keep you on your toes today, but let's begin. We're starting with a strong one here, as Cubone is almost literally born from misfortune. It literally wears the skull of its dead mother, which, at least within the natural ecosystem, Mandibuzz is the most common natural predator of Cubone. This doesn't, though, explain who is creating so many Cubone in every other location or every other region in which we find them, but we do have a couple of other culprits if we look at lore and the routes that Cubone appears on. For example, within the first generation, and maybe even the second, you can easily blame the Cubone population on Team Rocket. You couldn't even find them in the wild in the first games, only within Pokemon Tower would you find them, which is, of course, our tower of Pokemon that have been laid to rest within Lavender Town. Even when we look at the next generation, we find them in Rock Tunnel, a place that connects to Lavender Town and would be seen as a familiar, dark, and safe home for Cubone after they leave the tower. These Pokemon don't even get the choice on whether or not to leave said tower either, because Lavender Tower is eventually repurposed into a radio tower, while the graves are all moved to a smaller mausoleum effectively that likely has a basement where the Pokemon are then buried from then forth. This ultimately leaves the Cubone without a home, and they find the cave to be the most familiar place to where they last saw their mother. And even if we look at the future games, it is only found in similar conditions, assuming you can even find them at all, because they are otherwise not a commonly occurring Pokemon and needs some sort of tragedy to befall them, which always makes people wonder, what were they before they were Cubone? We still technically don't know, and there's tons of theories, of course. The closest we get to this being a natural occurrence is when we find them in Glittering Cave in Kalos, and the only Pokemon outside of that cave that would be a threat would be Sandile, which is kind of a threat to everybody. So it's a little rocky as to what's causing them to appear otherwise, as I actually doubt Team Flare was out eliminating Cubone mothers to sell their skulls like Team Rocket was. Now, in one instance, as we have this new life given to Cubone through tragedy, it can go one of two ways. In one version, a traditional Cantonian Marowak is what Cubone will evolve into once it has come to terms with its mother's passing and has finished crying. It's kind of like the Gohan of Pokemon, if you would. Now, it will then evolve stand up in its new form, and then search for the one that caused its life tragedy, aiming to seek vengeance upon the criminal, which is pretty baller, I've gotta say. You could have a whole classic coming-of-age fighting movie all about Cubone and getting vengeance. Maybe even have other Pokemon, like a retired Machamp, train it, and it eventually encounters a very mean but wise Steelix. Just some stupid but fun ideas. Back on track though, there is a very interesting Dex entry that states that there is a rumor of a Marowak graveyard somewhere out there, somewhere that no one has ever seen apparently, a place where Marowak gets all of its sturdy bones from. And if this is the case, then it would mean that many Marowak likely come together in their time of tragedy and bond together as a family over the circumstances of their birth. In fact, it is through this pain-driven connection that a bond is formed. As with Ultra Moon's Pokédex, we find out that they thump their bones rhythmically to communicate with each other, with nearly 50 different patterns. It's almost like a war drum, or even what slaves have done many times, using music to communicate when their oppressors are near. When we move away from Kanto and into Alola, we find that Alolan Marowak doesn't just long for the mother that they have lost, but actually finds a way to access their power. Or rather, it would be more apt to say that the ghost of the mother does more than she has in the past in order to protect her child. And that's not to disparage Marowak of other regions. We've seen the Marowak ghost in Lavender Tower and how it served to try and protect its children from humanity. It disappears with one last tearful goodbye after we kick Team Rocket out of the tower, and it never returns, knowing that the future of its child is secure and safe even though hardship will continue to arrive. With an Alola, there's a bit of a different story, because it is actually an incredibly harsh environment just for Cubone, with an incredible number of grass and water Pokemon, while also being surrounded by water on all sides, putting Cubone at a great disadvantage. I don't know why its ancestors decided that it should spawn here, but they did. So instead of departing, the regrets of the mother continue to linger within the bones of its fallen body and form a vengeful spirit, a wraith that will serve alongside its child as they become an Alolan Marowak, a speaker with spirits, a fire dancer, a Pokemon that puts incredible value into the connections that it has with others. The flames it creates are cursed. They cannot be extinguished by any amount of water, and as such, will burn the foe to nothingness if Marowak so wished, with a power that hurts physically and mentally. This is also not to say that it disregards life and is a cruel creature. No, instead this Marowak has a great reverence towards life. It could not have actually even evolved without the aid and support of its allies, and so not only does it protect the ones it loves, but it also dances through the night to mourn any fallen allies. In its most recent Dex entry, it states that the Marowak directly transformed the spirit of the departed mother into flames, and tonight it will dance once again in mourning of others of its kind, making this more than just a momentary thing when allies pass away, but rather a nightly ritual. There are many cultures in which you are meant to celebrate, mourn, or at least give respects to the dead regularly. There are many methods in which to do this, but each holds great significance and is full of emotion. I actually remember when I've had family members pass away, people typically didn't really cry. They celebrated life. They celebrated the life that they had. And it helps us feel connected to those that we have lost and feel something greater than ourselves. And it is absolutely a comfort for our Marowak here, who has transformed their grief into a form of protection that it can use to protect others. In the wake of climate change, we find that our dear coral Pokemon Corsola passed away, and it is a bit too late to send flowers. The waters grew too acidic for its body, bleached its coral, and effectively killed its polyp, if you could technically consider there to be a polyp inside of Corsola, if Corsola itself is not the actual polyp, but that's whatever scientific jargon we're not going to get into right now. And now we pay our respects with one great big F. Though that is only what I would say if Galarian Corsola and Cursola weren't one of my favorite regional variants of all time, and it kind of brings it back to life. Though it is still a little bit sad that this Pokemon flat out did die, and it somehow was brought back to life. Don't get me wrong, Bleached Coral does have the capacity to come back to life, quote unquote, but it requires all of the factors that caused it to go away, such as high acidity in the waters, just to be completely resolved. Even then, recovery could take months, years, or never even happen at all. It would potentially be easier just to start from scratch in that area. and I was very fortunate to go scuba diving, and while underwater, I visited man-made structures created by Boy Scouts after the local university students took samples from the coral and basically wiped out the population. They were able to place large structures that would promote the growth of moss, attract fish, and of course coral polyps that would eventually make their home on these blocks placed underwater. It was genuinely a beautiful experience. I don't have the photos from that right now. And as I was underwater, I was down there for a good 57 minutes straight, looking at wildlife, finding massive starfish, and even getting to see an octopus camouflaged amongst the corals, which was incredible to find. Through this, I was able to learn quite a bit about marine life firsthand, and the experience was worth every single penny and every second, so I'll be excited to talk more about that when it's relevant, such as bringing up the coral in the first place. Which brings me back to my original point, which is that while it is entirely possible for Corsola to revive itself, it is doing so in a much more malicious way. For any time someone bumps into it, it takes a bit of their life force while also cursing them. Now, life force is not your spirit energy. It isn't going to immediately kill you or shorten your lifespan by bumping into one or two of these rocks. I've actually found that Pokemon makes a very distinct difference between life force and spirit, with your life force being something that could be restored naturally over time. It's essentially your constitution for all my D&D nerds out there. So Galarian Corsola is taking just a little bit of energy as a snack back to itself all the time whenever anyone bumps into it, and once it has enough, it will burst from its calcium prison and evolve into Corsola, a creature that can turn you to stone at a touch, and gathers under the light of the full moon while stretching their arms out to the sky. The fascinating thing about this is actually twofold. One being the reason that is set in the behavior of real coral, and the other being set in cultural reasons. Because coral, like many other living creatures in our world, use the moon as a sort of biological clock, with their mass spawning events synchronized not only with each other, but also typically happening a few nights after the full moon, maximizing fertilization success in the now lowering levels of light, using the dark as cover from any would-be predators. What this could then mean is that despite everything, Corsola is trying to reproduce and continue its lineage. After all, you can find Galarian Corsola naturally in a number of areas, the areas primarily being where water has dried up, but they're still there, grasping at what life they still have. And if we want to judge this based on game mechanics, slap an Everstone on Galarian Corsola or Corsola, and throw that thing in the ring with a viable Pokemon from its shared A group, and you'll have your bright, pink, adorable Corsola back. I think it's Mineral and Water 2. Editing Acrylic, correct me. So there is a chance that they can recover in full one day. The cultural reason is actually pretty simple though, because it's just revolving around the idea of the moon giving spirits or being a symbol of the spirit in some capacity, granting ghosts or any other creatures that do rely on it greater power. You've heard many of the stories before regarding supernatural tales of don't go out during the full moon, witches become more powerful, werewolves stalk and prowl everywhere. Then it goes to giving spirits power, of which our Corsola are. So in terms of Pokemon, maybe it is helping them grow stronger, and it isn't just a cue for them to try and make the next generation. The White Striped Basculin are one of 3 types of Basculin that exist within the world of Pokemon. They're a strange mix of large bass with the aggressive nature of a piranha mixed with a beta fish, because in all reality, piranhas aren't actually as aggressive as they're made out to be. People swim in piranha-infested waters all the time apparently, and at worst have lost a toe due to blood in the water and the fish being incredibly hungry. But Basculin still takes that aggressive nature and then ramps it up to a 10, and turning it into one of the only 2 Pokemon that do not flee from areas in which Corphish and Crawdon to make their home. This is actually only true though for Red and Blue Basculin, as white striped ones are said to be far more docile by comparison. In addition, as they move upstream in their migration, there are many things that can, and unfortunately do, go wrong, causing the death of many of their kind. Instead of allowing themselves to fully fall into the pit of despair though, these Basculin grasp at their family through the veil of death and find a way to empower them through rage and sorrow, combining the living and the dead to be reborn as its evolution Basculegion. Now, Basculegion is strange because now it takes on the qualities of salmon. The visual breakage of its body that we see can be equated to zombie salmon. The US Fish and Wildlife Service has an article actually written by Katrina Liebig on this exact phenomenon, and it even looks like it's part of a greater podcast that is served, so if you want to go listen to more of that, you can. And they state the following: set in motion at birth, the fate of Pacific salmon is like clockwork. Each year, a new generation returns from sea to spawn, then death. Pacific salmon spawn only once per lifetime. As they make their final journey home, their silver sides blush as pigments that give their flesh its appetizing red hue move to their skin. The fat that models their tasty fillets burns up as females become vessels for plump, fatty eggs. For both sexes, fat stored in their muscles and livers is totally used up by the time they reach the spawning grounds. They grind their tails into the gravel, hoping to make deep enough nests that withstand the scour of ice and spring floods. Males tap into the reserves to grow fearsome teeth and hooked upper jaws that they can use against each other. The changes salmon undergo near the end of their life are profound and system-wide, including the eventual widespread deterioration of internal organs. When the frenzy's all said and done, they're spent, their fate is sealed. It's just a matter of days, a couple of weeks at most. And there's far more to this, but in their article, they even show a fish that they found that was just dead to rights, or they talk about it. Chunks of it are missing, it is badly decayed, an eye is gone, and when they picked it up, it was not only still alive, but it released spawn all over researchers, which that just sends a shiver through me, a wave of just disgust, because you know what that is. I don't need to explain what spawn is, but somehow these creatures in real life continue to thrive and survive despite circumstances. Well, thriving is kind of a big word to use, very generous word, but they're surviving, which leads us back to Basculegion in its goal of continuing its lineage no matter what. The male variants are tinged red by rage, while the female variants are paler as they hold the power of illusions through their sadness, which is reflected through that zombie salmon and the colors that they change into. Both of these versions of Basculegion still holding on to those emotions that drive them forward, stronger than ever before. What I wonder though is what happens to those souls after Basculegion reaches its goal. Will they disperse and we watch as Basculegion devolves? Will Basculegion simply pass away due to overexertion? Or maybe nature completes the cycle after it releases spawn and an Ursaluna takes it as its meal before a harsh winter. I'll let you decide that one for yourself. Yamask has always been a bit of a creepy one even on the surface, because they are Pokemon that are born from humans while still carrying a mask from their former life. And when they look at this mask of their former self, they cry, all while still desperately trying to find someone that would recognize their face. Even Galarian Yamask is no better, as a cursed stone attaches to a departed spirit, binding them together and filling the spirit with malicious intent as they now become a singular Pokemon together. These two Pokemon have had their life, or rather afterlife, stolen from them, now burdened with grief and malicious energy, though there are reasons for why both of these Pokemon actually occur, that these spirits may have had an unfortunate or malicious past before they had passed from the mortal coil, situations that beget the new cursed lives that they now live, as their emotions are too strong to allow them to pass on into the afterlife proper. In the case of Unnovan Yamask, we first find them in Relic Castle, and in fact we never find them in the wild ever again within the mainline games, which brings me to something that I have claimed for a long time now, and it's that Volcarona caused the Yamask to be created. Volcarona is worshipped as a deity of the sun, which likely occurred due to a great tragedy in which maybe the sun was blotted out for a longer period of time. In this, the people of Relic Castle would then need warmth and light, in which Volcarona could provide. And as time went on, they would worship it. They would keep their doors closed from the degrading environment outside and stay with this behemoth of a powerful moth. And in doing so, they sealed their own fate, because Volcarona directly states that its flames burn up all oxygen within the area. And I don't know about you, but I need approximately 21% of oxygen in my air in order to survive and function. So the oxygen burns up, the people pass away in a rather horrifying way, and in their tragedy, their grief they are reborn as a Pokemon, though they cling onto their past life, wanting someone to recognize them and their horrid fate, someone to share that grief with, so that way they may one day pass on. To make it darker, these Pokemon eventually wander for so long that they actually make residence within deep tombs as fake coffins, now evolving into Coffagrigus, a Pokemon that eats gold and lies in wait for any grave robbers who would dare disturb the final resting place of other beings, as it serves to protect others from the same fate as its own self, preventing more wandering spirits from being born into the world due to them being disturbed in their rest. Now though, we do take the other route. Instead of grief, we take anger, frustration, and a mistake that should have never happened in the first place, because the cursed rune likely targeted the spirit it attached to for a reason. This reasoning, for Galarian Yamask, likely being because it touched or defiled the runestone, especially considering what it looks like when it becomes Runerigus. Now, runestones are incredibly fascinating, and I feel incredibly lucky to have audience members from across the world, as one in particular, Talumiel, thank you very much, was very kind, and on their trip that they took, they actually took pictures of some runestones that they came across in person. Like, I also hope that you didn't touch any of them, because otherwise a great curse would have then been placed on you. From the National Museum of Denmark, we get the following information. Runestones are by and large only found in Scandinavia. Around 250 runestones are known from Viking Age Denmark. Most of the Scandinavian examples are from Sweden, where there are over 3,000 inscriptions. The tradition apparently only became widespread in Denmark after Harald Bluetooth, interesting last name, erected the large gelling stone for his father, Gorm the Old, also interesting last name for Hollow Knight lovers out there, and his mother, Thyra, around 970. Most of the runestones in Denmark were raised in the period c. 975 to 1025. Now, they are often easily described as X raised this stone for Y. The runic inscriptions always name the people who erected the stones and those these stones were raised for. Runestones were placed in honor of both men and women, often mentioning the deceased's closest kin, position in society, and perhaps a short description of his or her character and the circumstances surrounding death. The inscription could also include the rune carver's name and a curse upon anyone who dares to desecrate the stone. In addition, after the introduction of Christianity, a prayer for the soul of the deceased might be present. Ornamentation and images are also found upon runestones, and those ornamentation or images may be crosses, they may be other decorations, they may be Jormungandr. And these curses are as you would expect. Curses of ailment, curses of misfortune, curses of death. Whichever the carver may believe is effectively the limit to these curses. And unfortunately, Yamask's original spirit is the receiver of this curse. The power is siphoned from Galarian Yamask more and more until eventually it is bestowed a greater form as it evolves into Runerigus, another one of my favorite regional variants, if not a top 25 Pokemon for me. And as it evolves into Runerigus, it now bears not only a symbol similar to that of any other runestone, but rather it bears the markings of a serpent, that which we can tie into the world serpent itself, Jormungandr, an unfathomably large and monstrous sea serpent or worm who dwells in the world sea, encircling the earth, Midgard, and biting its own tail, an example of an Ouroboros. It is a symbol of life, death, and rebirth as a whole. In order to evolve it into Runerigus, it needs to take 49 points of damage and be brought to the large stone arch in the Dusty Bowl area of the wild area within Galar. The arch that is very similar to that of a dolmen, which is also called a portal tomb. The number 49 relates to the Antarabhava, a Buddhist concept of purgatory after death and before reincarnation. This process of Buddhist purgatory is said to take 49 days. In other words, the soul that the runestone is attached to has now undergone a complete rebirth thanks to our help. Theoretically speaking, through evolving it into Runerigus, we may have effectively caused the old spirit of the runestone to overtake the Yamask spirit and granting it a new chance at life, which Sure, the person who originally touched the stone is bad since they assumedly desecrated the stone, and they kinda deserved it to some capacity, but we're talking about eternal life being snuffed out. That person is effectively gone. They don't get a second chance. Either the soul within the stone has been reborn anew, taking over the old soul's place, or the two souls have combined to form one entity. Either way, it's pretty bad for that original soul. Now, you'd expect Runeriga's rebirth to actually be a good thing, for through the 49 days of purgatory, it has atoned for its sins, making something new and pure, but nope. Not only will you get horrific visions of its past if you touch it, which is something that the rune stones are said to be able to do in real life, but through the pieces now being assembled, the malicious power within it is fully unleashed. I just hope that malicious power is not directed towards anyone innocent. I've talked plenty about Zora and Zoroark in many of my other videos because they honestly just come up with many or within many different concepts, which is pretty dope. They're a cool Pokemon. What do you want from me? Though we'll be focusing on their rebirth through anger, the malice that drives them, and the grudge that will eventually be lifted through time and effort of humanity. You likely already know the story. Humanity fears the powers of Zora, they drive it out of Hisui, commit a complete wipeout of their kind, and through this cruel act we find the rebirth of Zora through an incredible grudge against humanity's actions. And as a side note, I get plenty of comments about how I pronounce Hisui, and all I have to say is, deal with it. I don't apologize for saying roots like rut, and you don't apologize for saying Vivillon instead of Vivillon. I'll also continue saying Kyurem instead of Curem, it's just how my face-mouth hole works, so oh well. You'd be hard-pressed to not have a ghost's backstory be from a traumatic experience. Every haunted place talks about how people were tortured or flat-out killed in horrific ways, and how the air there carries the weight of the misdeeds committed there, or how the ghost draws power from their pain, turning it into a malicious power for their own gain or revenge, and Hisui and Zora is no different. This is a story as old as time itself, with mankind all over the world coming up with stories of ghosts created from horrific mistreatment. So Zora getting this treatment is no real surprise, but the important piece of information is more than Zora or Zoroark drawing strong power from their grudge. It's that the grudge powers that Zoroark uses also harms itself. In some stories or beliefs, the longer you stay in purgatory or within the mortal plane after your death, the more likely you are to lose sight of yourself. You're more likely to start falling apart, to lose memories, and to become nothing more than a shade of your former self that is only driven by hatred, which actually does happen in Cofagrigus as well. It forgets what it was, becoming something new. And this hatred effectively destroys the soul, burning it away into nothingness and taking away what afterlife you were supposed to have. And this is what is happening to Hisui and Zoroark. The only solution to this in these beliefs or stories is to resolve the problem at hand, and we could be talking about some real return the slab type stuff, or bridging the gap through kindness and reverence, which is what humanity had to do here with Hisui and Zoroark. It is shown through the Hisui and Snow YouTube series that Zora and Zoroark can ally themselves with humans. It takes an incredible amount of effort and compassion, but proving yourself to the Zoroark results in it going as far as to even protect humans in need from an attacking alpha Pokemon. What can then be suspected is that over time, as this pain is mended through constant love, much like what we see with Shadow Pokemon, we will eventually watch the revenant that this Pokemon is forgive modern day humanity and fade away, explaining further how we don't see any of their kind in modern day Sinnoh. And before we continue to our next Pokemon, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're new, I have weekly deep dives like this that release every single Friday, so make sure that you do subscribe for more. In addition, if you have any counter arguments or further insight on anything I say, comment it below. I love reading the comments, plus between comments, watch time, and sharing the video, you help boost the reach more than you know. If you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member for as little as $3 a month, as you support free content for everyone while getting perks such as early access to videos and your name shouted out in the credits. We also have 43 total people on the Patreon, paid and unpaid, and if we hit the 100 total, I'll make sure to send out some monthly newsletters for everyone every month on that Patreon for free. Plus, then if you join there or the Discord server, you won't miss any live streams or new video notifications. But enough of that. thank you once more for watching, and on with the video. An unfortunate rebirth is that life of a Honedge, a Pokemon that is said to come into existence when someone is killed by a sword and their departed spirit returns to inhabit the sword that then killed them long ago. Now, originally I had interpreted this as the sword kills them and then they immediately inhabit the sword, but that's not the case. It seems as though the spirit comes back to the earthly realm and decides to possess the sword, then becoming a Pokemon as another form of reincarnation rather than always being a form of instant maliciousness. This also lines up with the yokai that are known as Tsukumogami, objects that exist for 100 years and then come to life, becoming self-aware. Whether they are benevolent, malevolent, or something in between then depends on how the object was treated in its lifetime. The interesting part about this is that Honedge turns from this Pokemon that seems immediately evil as a life force absorbing ghost into a coordinated machine and Doublade that attacks prey, and finally into Aegislash that proceeds to have found a way to make the public believe that it can see the qualities of the next leader or next king to a throne. Though there's definitely malice still deep within it, as it proceeds to have the capability to then drain the king of their life force, which is then stated in Dex entries to have caused an entire kingdom to fall with their king, which could be just because a kingdom is unprepared, but it could also be that Aegislash had planted seeds within the kingdom through its rise alongside the chosen king, and when it kicked the block underneath, everything fell as it had wanted. This is because, as at least seen through the Pokemon Adventures manga, the Aegislash line has incredibly hypnotic capabilities, able to completely control the person that wields them. So it would be no surprise to find that an entire kingdom was raised and felled by this Pokemon, and for what reason? Could be no more than a grudge against the kingdom that warred against them in their mortal life, simply wanting revenge in any way it could produce it, or maybe it simply had a grudge against the kingdom that it belonged to that forced it to go to war. Either way, it comes back from the afterlife full of malice in order to fell kingdoms. Welcome to Watch Mojo, where we talk about the 10 darkest Pokemon Dex entries. Coming in at 10 is Phantump, because look, everyone talks about Phantump and how it was once a child who wandered into the woods, got lost and died. Boo-hoo, alright? I get lost in the woods all the time and I didn't die. Too much, at least. It mimics the voices of others and continues to try and play with others, which then only results in more people getting lost in the woods and passing away. Though, once it does evolve into Trevenant, it becomes a guardian of the forest in which it resides. It protects the smaller Pokemon, it scares away lumberjacks, and is horrifying if you disrespect the forest, because then it will simply trap you deep within it with no chance to escape. With these Pokemon at least being shown in the anime to live for an incredibly long time, though they are still capable of passing away eventually. Now, there's plenty of different stories that could tie back to this relationship of people or creatures that pass away within the forest only to lose their memories and just become a new living protector of the forest. So, simply put, these Pokemon are arguably more akin to the story of treants in that they are sentient trees with faces on them that serve to protect the entirety of the forest, as they are even able to command the forest as though it were part of their own body, just the same as Trevenant does. Nice and easy, and we can move on to our next entry. Give your Charcadet auspicious armor or malicious armor, and you'll find it overtaken by the will of what was left within it, transforming it into either Armarouge or Ceruledge, the Mega Man characters of the Pokemon world, and we're all better for it. The armor making of Armarouge is stated to have belonged to a distinguished warrior, which is then further reflected in how it prefers to fight fair and head-on, no matter how strong the opponent is. As such, it takes hits head-on with sturdy armor while blasting away at its enemies, almost like a very strong hero shrugging off hits. Meanwhile, with Ceruledge, it is known to be merciless, using sneak or surprise attacks while heavily taking advantage of foes' blind spots. Its power is drawn from bitter feelings within its own body, and through harnessing that into dark flames, it can leave behind wounds that leak life energy and of course can heal it. Now, in the past I have talked about the legends of Wilfred the Hairy and El Cantar de Mio Cid, both stories being suspected to inspire Charcadet's evolutions. But I want to take this in a bit of a different direction rather than just completely telling you their stories. For you see, Wilfred the Hairy was celebrated as an individual, his golden shield being granted 4 vertical red bars, thus making the design resemble the Catalan flag or señera. This is important as Catalonia is within Spain and is part of the Iberian Peninsula alongside Portugal, this collection of cultures being an inspiration for Paldea. And while Wilfred was honored, El Cid had a much more difficult time landing his place as the national hero of Spain according to the public. Now, there are plenty of romanticized stories of El Cid, and then there's the real story. Though in either case, he was an individual who had been noted to fall from grace, quote unquote, depending on who you talk to, having been most likely exiled at the beginning of the year 1081. And in fact, he was exiled twice. The second time as a warlord, though the man whose name is actually Rodrigo would continue to serve the lands of Saragossa until autumn of 1092. Valencia surrendered in war to him, and he adopted the name Prince Rodrigo the Battler alongside the Arabian title of Sidi, my lord, which is the assumed origin of his name El Cid. And long story short, despite being exiled twice, El Cid would serve to become a great hero for the lands that he chose to protect. That even though he had been bitterly sent away from his homes, he continued to find a place as a hero and earn it. But what if he hadn't? Not only is that where Ceruledge comes in, a Pokemon that resembles the bitter resentment of defeat, of banishing, and of never accomplishing its goal, but it also serves as the opposite to the more heroic golden form that Almarouge serves. These two Pokemon on opposite sides of the war, souls that have already died once, but their will continued to fill the armor that they left behind. And as Charcadet dons this armor, it takes up their mantle, their emotions, and their power. Though that also makes me question once more if we have a fusing of souls, if these feelings are just granted to Charcadet as it evolves, or if there's some other reasoning behind it all. Greavard and Houndstone have very interesting dex entries that give us a very sad story when we put it all together. Because to begin with, literal Greavard is noted to be a dog Pokemon that died in the wild without ever interacting with a human. It was then reborn as this Pokemon, and they primarily live in the Boreal Mountains. The only other dog Pokemon that spawns in the same area as Greavard are Mastiff, Mabustiff, Dachshund, and Lycanroc, though I'm sure it isn't limited to them and what we might see in future regions. So not only can theoretically any of our many dog Pokemon pass away and be reborn as Greavard, but now as it has been reborn, if you give it any amount of attention, then it will follow you forever, which sounds great. You get a free ghost dog, you get to be best friends, and when you die, you could get to go on ghost adventures together. But here's the problem. If they rub their fur against anyone, then it will absorb their life force until they are utterly drained. So now I'm just kind of imagining either of my own dogs, when they want attention, they kind of push against you, they put their nose under your hand and kind of lift it up. They do everything they can just so they can get just a little bit more attention, even if you've been petting them for the last 30 minutes. It's just what they want, and it does make them happy. Meaning Greavard is no different, minus the, life-stealing part, of course. Again, though, taking life force isn't necessarily going to kill you as long as you are taking care of yourself, eating right, so on and so forth, and can recover. This would also mean that we'd need to be extra careful with Greavard and know when to stop giving it physical attention unless we do want to die, and I don't want to die from being, caring for my dog. The process of taking life energy has helped Pokemon like Morello evolve into Shiinotic in the anime, but also Litwick and Lampent evolve in their own rights, amongst many other Pokemon. So, with that information, we can then assume that a Greavard that has received enough loving care and attention will then evolve into Houndstone, and it doesn't have to be based on battle. This Pokemon, having effectively evolved from receiving the attention it didn't have in life and being cared for so deeply, has turned it into an incredibly loyal Pokemon, arguably one of the most loyal, and caring for its friends. Thus, it has its signature move, which only gets stronger once its friends have passed away. Real big anime moment it has. Houndstone is also stated to be reborn from a loyal dog Pokemon that stayed at the gravestone of its dearly departed master. It stayed for so long that it was fully reborn as a ghost Pokemon, which you then may be reminded of Fry's dog from Futurama, but this goes deeper, as I could just about guarantee that this was inspired by the story of Hachiko. The tale of Hachiko is hidden in a number of different stories, including the Skiddo pair that are left at the train station within Pokemon X and Y. This loyal dog being someone who has received even movies in its honor, or at least a movie in its honor, as their original owner that they were loyal to had left on a train and never came back. Not out of malice, but simply because that individual had passed away. And after Ueno's death, Hachiko was treated very poorly by most people who worked at or came to Shibuya Station. This, though, did not deter our loyal pup. After he became nationally known, his story of fidelity and loyalty grew, and he came to be treated better. He also had significant health problems his entire life. After he had become known internationally, his story led to Helen Keller bringing the first Akita to America. And since his death, he continues to be remembered worldwide in popular culture with statues, movies, and books. But the story at least does have a happy ending, because eventually he would be taken in by a kind gardener named Kobayashi, who provided food and shelter at first, only to evolve into fully taking Hachiko in and giving a happy ending to this sad tale, just like the happy ending that we have with Grievard and Houndstone. Stress and anger really put a strain on the body, and as it builds up within Primeape, it eventually causes something to snap within its body, or rather its brain, and results in the literal death of our Pokemon. Now, it is quite literally unshackled from the mortal coil, but it is so angry that it even refuses to stay dead, and instead comes back as a revenant, much like what we see with Hisuian Zoroark. And I would like to joke that it's an aneurysm, but that is quite literally what happens to it, as in its ZA Dex it states, Primeape evolved into Annihilape after repeatedly using a move with enough force to burst the blood vessels in its head. This move that it is alluding to is of course Rage Fist, a move that grows in power the more the user has already been hit. It converts the rage it holds within its body into pure power for striking at others, so of course the angrier you are, the stronger your attack. And with Primeape being a Pokemon that is almost always angry, you'd have expected this to have happened sooner, but for some strange reason it didn't. I mean, this Pokemon is almost quite literally born angry, gets angry when you look at it, sleeps angry, it wakes up angry if you do wake it up. If you fight it when it's angry and you win, it just gets angrier, and the angrier it gets, the better its blood circulation gets and the stronger its muscles are. Well, every muscle except for its brain, as it is noted to become less intelligent. Then, by the time we get into Alola, we finally start seeing these Pokemon become so angry that they die. And as they lay in their death, they look peaceful for the first time. So it is entirely possible for these Pokemon to die and pass away peacefully. In fact, it's also through the Ultra Moon Dex that we find out that the blood vessels in its brain are said to be sturdier than those of other Pokemon, making sure it can stay healthy despite all the raging that it does within its cage. Then along comes the Primeape within Paldea, which manages to push beyond the limits of anger, die, and come back to life angry, which you could link to Onryo, which these have a number of different names, such as Vengeful Spirit, Wrathful Spirit, or Hatred Spirits, effectively ghosts capable of causing harm to the living through injury or flat out killing them. They were rumored to have gone even as far as creating entire natural disasters to right the wrongs they were dealt when they were alive. Their jealousy, rage, or hatred transforming them and preventing them from passing on to the afterlife, and the curses they inflict are rumored to be able to be contagious like a disease. Their only goal in the afterlife is to cause destruction even after their original target has been punished. Annihilape is a pretty rough Pokemon to have and go against at the end of the day, and were I in the Pokemon world, I would just hope there's some way to exorcise this demon and just put it to rest. Glalie and Frostlass are up next, a dynamic duo of characters that were lost in the mountains and perished in the deep, cold, snowy lands. Their spirits have now been reformed into something new, something powerful, and a bit malicious. I personally often forget that Glalie, despite not being a ghost type, is very much a ghost in how it was created. To explain, Dex entries state that legend says a boulder on an icy mountain absorbed the distress and regrets of a stranded mountaineer, giving rise to Glalie. This is actually pretty well reflected by its design, as when we look a bit closer at its form, all of the white icy bits are just a covering for its rocky body. Especially as it mega evolves, it even seems to lose some of the ice, and the rock itself cracks open much like a geode, and now it kind of just looks like it has a big old beard. What throws some people off, though, is that despite being seen as a male counterpart to the always female Frostlass, you can have male and female Glalie. As such, you can have little Snorunt children with just Glalie, or a Glalie and a Frostlass, yet Snorunt itself still manages to be pure ice and be much friendlier overall than either of these Pokemon tend to be in their legends. Because as we look at Frostlass, we look at it directly representing the Yuki-Onna, a snow woman, in direct translation, that will choose its prey and freeze them to death before taking away their life energy, something that Frostlass does in nearly every single Dex entry. Touch one and your life force is drawn away in a flash as you feel cold seep into the deepest part of your bones. It doesn't matter what your intentions are, though there are times when this can be avoided, as Yuki-Onna may fall in love with their prey, letting them go free or going as far as building a relationship and family with said prey. And this is no Beauty and the Beast Stockholm Syndrome, it's more like getting catfished to some capacity, and instead of a regular human, you get a super powerful and effectively unstoppable ice ghost that might kill you if you step out of line. You know what, I'm willing to take my risks with the Yuki-Onna, and I know I'm not the only one here. I know for a fact that there are little monsters in the comments out there that would not hesitate, and I don't blame you. I'd be just like you. Anywho, the idea of the Yuki-Onna falling in love and marrying what was originally their prey is reflected in Frostlass's Mega Evolution, as it wears a full bridal kimono, something I would not have known without Poketsutomi's assistance back when I made my video deep diving into all of ZA's Mega Pokemon. Except now, there are more Pokemon regarding the Megas thanks to Mega Dimensions, but I'll get to those at a later date. Now, you would then expect with parents like these that little old Snorunt would be in a lot of trouble, but by lore standards, my favorite little ice-type Pokemon will be just fine. Because not only are Snowrunts shown to be not shaking like a Chihuahua, as it normally does, when it is in the safe care of Glalie or Frostlass, but also at least when we look at some of the oldest stories of the Yuki-Onna, they are far more protective of the children they have with the humans they might marry. In fact, the original story goes as far to say that the Yuki-Onna wanted to kill the man that she had married for betraying her and lying to her, but decided not to as long as he never hurt their kids together. And the second he does hurt a single hair on their head, she will freeze him to death. It feels as if, despite both Glalie and Frostlass having lost their lives, considering they are able to have Snorunt eggs, they are serving to create a new life from their new forms. Pokemon that were once dead, deciding to create something new and positive. Unless you want to go the direction of saying that Snorunt is thematically the frozen child of the trio, making it so that we have the Donner Party trio, which, if you don't know the Donner Party, they got trapped up in the cold mountains and cannibalized each other in order to try and survive. But there's no real evidence that such a thing would be the inspiration for these Pokemon, especially as there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of what happens to people when they go up the cold peaks of a great mountain and pass away up there. I mean, it's effectively a giant's graveyard on some mountains, just because people pass away while climbing and the average person is not equipped to go up there and drag down what are effectively perfectly preserved bodies. So of course, with all these individuals who have unfortunately passed away, you can imagine that they have many lingering regrets that would then be rumored to exist within their souls, thus spawning ghosts. Or, in the case of Pokemon, Glalie and Frostlass. So, once again, we get this idea of a mission or regrets or purpose being unfulfilled that then causes a new being to spawn into existence. Cryogonal is similar to what we just talked about, but is also incredibly strange, with it having two rumored ways in which it is born. The majority of the Dex entries state that they are born with snow clouds or within them, while Pokemon Scarlet states that people in Pokemon who die on snowy mountains are reborn as Cryogonal. Despite only a singular entry stating this, I'm actually more inclined to believe it than I am to believe that they are born in snow clouds, or at least the fact that their bodies may be created in snow clouds, not that they were born there. The reason I say this is because of another ice Pokemon, Vanillite, who dies if it melts completely. It does not come back to life if you freeze the water that made it up, it is gone. But that is not the case for Cryogonal. Instead, it is stated that these Pokemon turn into steam when they melt, and then they disappear, only to freeze back into their Pokemon forms when the weather becomes cold enough. To make things more interesting, Cryogonal has 12 points to its body, something that is actually said to only occur when two different six-sided snowflakes merge together early in the snowflake process and then becomes this 12-pointed shape. So could there theoretically be two different Cryogonal coming together to form something new? Could a spirit be taking over the crystalline structures? Will we ever see another form for Cryogonal that explains this? The world may never know, but I at least wanted to talk shortly about Cryogonal because it's a bit of a mystery and I really would like to see it have an additional form. I don't even like the Pokemon all that much. I want closure. I just want closure. That's all I want. One of my favorite Pokemon to talk about is Spiritomb, all because of its crazy potential ties that we can make between it and Buddhism, and how Spiritomb may have been brought into existence. Spiritomb is arguably one of the most evil Pokemon out there. It is composed of 108 evil spirits, said directly, that have been sealed away in an odd keystone and have been left there for 500 years. I have theorized in the past that due to Hisuian Typhlosion being a creature that purifies spirits and sends them into the afterlife with the use of 108 flames, that it was the creator of many Spiritomb if it didn't just flat out create the first. But there's definitely more to this story than I have ever explained in the past, especially as Hisui would take place at the end of the Edo period and the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, which would be in 1868, not even 200 years ago, so it can't have been the creator of the first Spiritomb. From the San Mateo Buddhist temple, I bring you the following. The number 108 has great significance in Buddhism. There are multiple commentaries on the meaning of it. The following are two common explanations. Nagarjuna's explanation of the significance of the number 108 from his commentary on the perfection of great wisdom. Human beings have 6 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, and then of course you add in thought. Nagarjuna says that for each of these senses we can experience 3 different kinds of feelings: pleasurable feelings, unpleasant, neutral response to feelings that are neither pleasurable nor unpleasant. Thus we get 6 senses and 3 feelings, multiply them for 18 total different combinations. Nagarjuna goes on to explain that these 18 kinds of feelings can be either pure or impure. Pure feelings are free of self-centered expectations that things will look, sound, taste a certain way. For example, if things aren't as expected, I can enjoy peace of mind with the reality of the situation as it is. Impure feelings arise in response to our self-centered expectations. For example, I get upset when I see, hear, smell something that does not align with my desires, the desired outcome. So 18 times 2, 36. Finally, Nagarjuna says that each of these 36 kinds of feelings exist in one of 3 time periods, whether that be in the past, present, or future. Take 36, multiply it by 3, we now have 108. In the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist tradition, the ringing of the bell 108 times on New Year's Eve is a time to recognize the various ways that our self-centered feelings cause us to create problems for ourselves and others, and express of our gratitude for Amida Buddha's compassionate vow that carries us from this impure world of self-centered delusion to the pure land of awakening. And I suppose now is a great time for me to say Happy New Year. Once again, showing why I decided to make this video for the new year. But back to the story, we also get the 108 afflictions. These are conceptual afflictions in the 3 realms of birth and death. We have desire, form, and formless realms. These give us the truth of suffering, origination of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the path for each of these. These, in turn, all attach to ideas such as greed, hatred, ignorance, pride, doubt, extreme views, and much more. Now, I won't go into all the details about this because it will just get incredibly repetitive and effectively mean that not only can you see suffering, you can find the source, stop it, or find yourself on the path of it. Basically, all the different options, once again, that there are for every action that you may take in life, every feeling, every thought process, so on and so forth. And at the end, we see the 10 innate afflictions and the 10 fetters, which are then lack of conscience, lack of shame, envy, stinginess, regret, drowsiness, flightiness, melancholy, wrath, and hypocrisy. When we combine everything together, we then get the total of 108 once more. Now, we take all of this information and translate it into Spiritomb, and we can see that it is through its actions as separate spirits. Each spirit can represent every single one of these 108 afflictions, innate afflictions, and fetters combined. Their ill nature continues to influence their actions, being mischievous Pokemon that lay curses on others or even go as far as possessing them, as they may even enact vengeance. Multiple keystones can be found deep underground, and to take things further, according to Pokemon Sleep, each of the 108 spirits dream separately from each other, which is wild, because the idea behind this Pokemon is that their spirits have been joined as one entity. But this would then mean that each of the spirits truly do have their own consciousness. It sounds like common sense considering the spirits can break away from Spiritomb, but to have entirely different thought processes or dreams is very interesting. And even if we ignore this, then we can support that this idea can still be true in the mainline games when we look at Legends Arceus. It's here where we are introduced to a spirit of Spiritomb in humanoid form. It tasks us with finding all of the lost wisps, and once we do, she disappears as Spiritomb itself reappears once more. But this singular spirit of a little girl didn't seem to be evil or malicious at all, so what does this mean? Well, the spirits being trapped in the stone are supposed to atone for their sins. They are meant to roil in their hatred and misdeeds against each other until they effectively realize their wrongdoings. And while the dex entries kind of allude to this, at least within the water margin, this is true. Another potential inspiration for Spiritomb, and a Chinese tale that adds another connection to the Buddhism inspiration. We find that these spirits can transform. In their atonement, they become the 108 Stars of Destiny, otherwise known as the 108 Heroes, when their seal is cracked open. They band together for the sake of justice, though you might find them to be divided, as the 36 Heavenly Stars, or Spirits, and the 72 Earthly Stars, or Earthly Fiends. When we look at different cultures, we find that just by being a mortal on Earth, that you are impure and need to find ways to enlighten yourself, to make yourself a better person. So if you reside on the planet, it makes sense that you may be called a fiend. These 72 fiends still served to protect the weak, punish villains, and embody the spirit of righteousness and justice, much like what we would find individuals such as Asuras or fierce deities doing. They are here to destroy evil in almost the same action movie level. Because of this potential inspiration for Spiritomb, I do hope that one day Spiritomb gets that alternate form in which the spirits have changed and transformed, now changing it from a ghost dark type to maybe a ghost fairy type, or maybe even slip in the fighting type for the idea of justice. For all of you out there in relationships, I beg of you, put down your pride and just ask for directions, or use your phone for directions. Otherwise, you might find yourself turning into a Bramblin. The wandering souls of individuals accidentally fuse themselves with dried grass as they got tangled together. It is then forced to wander forever as the wind takes it to places even it doesn't know. Now, in a previous video, I've talked about how tumbleweeds have buried an entire town in real life, just like its evolution Bramblegast has been warned to be able to do. Though there's something I haven't talked about that did catch my eye, and that is the story of the Alicorn. Thank you for Bulbapedia for suggesting that Bramblin may be inspired by it, as I dug a little bit further and found the following from Murcia Plaza, which sourced from the story of Pedro F. Perez. Documented in areas of the highlands such as Yecla and Jumilla, it is a soul or demon wrapped in a tumbleweed that appears on days of strong winds, seeking to snatch the soul of passers-by. To avoid this, the best thing to do is to make the sign of the cross when we are passing through these roads, or recite a prayer consecrated to the Virgin Mary asking for her protection. Now, I've always seen the form of Bramblegast as something that definitely looks bit more demonic, especially with the eyes or the type of eyes that it has. And of course, now that it has evolved, it takes the lives of others with it, absorbing their life force until it is satisfied or there is nothing left to absorb. The wind no longer controls where it goes, as it directs itself to its next meal, and there is always the chance that a horde of them can bury another town. The good news is that they're absolutely afraid of water, don't like touching it, and as such, Cascarafa town is completely surrounded by a moat of water, so we might know where that lost town is, especially as there's some ruins right by there. A short but kinda heartbreaking one is the tale of Meteor. They are nothing more or less than living shooting stars who will eventually come crashing down upon the planet. They first form in the atmosphere above, constructed of all the particulate matter that collects in the ozone layer and continuing to eat it until they become too heavy to stay up there and fall down to the planet. And upon crash landing, there is the chance that they crack open and their core is released. As this happens, there is only a short time until they disappear completely, their bodies no longer being held together by the sturdy casing. And man, is it depressing to see one disappear right before Sophocles' eyes. It's even more depressing when you read its Scarlet Dex entry. Meteor that fall to the ground try to return to space, but their wish will not come true. All they can do is fade away. Though I would like to assume that everything that makes up their bodies then disperses back into the air and eventually into the atmosphere. After all, there are tons of different kinds of particles that do so, whether it be from volcanic eruptions or man-made aerosols. So maybe the Meteor eventually reform in a new life and in a new color. A Pokemon that escapes the cycle of life and death, cheating it in its entirety actually, is Rabsca, because it transforms from a dung beetle into a scarab beetle. Even the name Rabsca is just an anagram of scarab. In fact, I guess it's not really even an anagram. It just flips the first and second half with each other. Either way, simply put, the scarab beetle we see carrying the ball is nothing more than a guardian body, hardly moving these days. But it is doing what it can still to protect the new baby forming inside of the ball that it is carrying, which is its true body. This also lines up with how dung beetles function in the real world, as they lay eggs inside of the dung balls they collect, and it then acts not only as a nursery, but also as their special little food source. But now, with this singular baby inside of this mystical dung ball, we find out that Rabsca puts more value in the baby than it does its own quote-unquote life. And again, that is simply because Rabsca is currently in the process of transferring its life, or rather its soul, into the new formed baby, allowing it to effectively cheat death unlike any other Pokemon. But why the Scarab Beetle? Well, because in fact they are dung beetles, meaning that this is way more of a natural progression than you might think. The Scarab Beetle, also known as the Dung Beetle, was associated with the sun god Ra, who is believed to roll the sun across the sky, much like the scarab rolling a ball of dung. This connection to the sun god imbued the scarab with powerful symbolism related to rebirth, regeneration, and the eternal cycle of life and death. The scarab was seen as a symbol of the sun's daily journey through the sky, as well as its nightly journey through the underworld. This goes to explain why the center of the ball is red, because it is meant to represent the setting sun. And when Rabsca finally passes away, the ball will fall down to the earth just as the sun does set and fall through to the underworld by their lore. And by the time the sun rises again, the ball will crack open and out will come another Rellor, eyes wide open once more. And I have to admit, originally this Pokemon didn't make much of an impact on me, but the more I've taken the time to understand this design, the more I have learned to appreciate it. Before we can finally talk about Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts, we have to talk about the strange case of the Loyal 3. Pokemon that were granted strength, intelligence, and beauty in exchange for their freedom, as they help Pecharunt obtain anything it wants to gift to those under the effect of its toxic mochi. But long ago, Ogerpon came in and is flat out stated to have killed all three of them for attacking her and her trainer for the masks that they once carried. These three, Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fezandipiti, were all buried by the people of Kitakami and given a shrine. But despite being effectively worshipped through yearly celebrations where they were praised as heroes, had masks made of them, and the entire celebration was literally called the Festival of Masks, it's not how they were brought back. Bulbapedia, actually, to try and explain the festival a little bit better, says it nice and easy as to what the real-life origin of this festival comes from. The Festival of Masks is based on the concept of traditional Japanese festivals that are typically held around late summer or early autumn. They are usually celebrated in relation to the local kami and features folk dances and other forms of ceremonies, along with various stalls selling food and goods related to the festivities. Notably, the Aomori Nabuta Matsuri is one of the largest festivals in the Tohoku region, featuring a procession of large illuminated floats depicting scenes of local legends. Now, I did talk about this in my last video, but kami are less gods and more divine beings or divine spirits, which to you, it may sound like it's the same exact thing, but in fact, kami could theoretically be anyone. As long as you seek self-improvement and attain it, then you may attain kami through your own enlightenment. Alternatively, this can be done through accomplishing a great goal with your own abilities. And strangely enough, the Loyal 3 did accomplish great feats by protecting Pecharunt and traveling across regions after their transformation from their previous forms into what we see today. In addition, kami can be dethroned or effectively killed, which even goes as far to explain why Volo intended to overthrow Arceus within Hisui. But if you want more on that, then go check out my video on why Pokemon loves the biblical apocalypse. Instead, I want to focus on the strange case of the Loyal 3 not being revived until Kirin had gotten angry and punched their shrine. The reason for this is actually right in front of our eyes, because this is something that will heavily lead us into the powers of Ho-Oh and the revival of the legendary beasts. Because through the power of wishes, of hopes, dreams, and desires, we find that Pokemon effectively have their own miracles. This can be the advent of Mega Rayquaza, it can be Jirachi granting literal wishes, or it can be what is the entirety of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, a game in which gyms are decentralized and the focus is put on the students of the academy finding their own treasure. They are given the tools and education required to reach their dreams and then work to attain them. But when we get into Kitakami, it seems as though the dreams and desires are twisted. Okidogi wants strength, Munkidori wants intelligence, Pheasantipiti wants beauty, and they take the shortcut to achieving these goals as Pecharunt gives it to them as it then chains them to its own will. After all, Pecharunt has already fed its mochi to the elderly couple of its story, drawing out their inner desires, though rather than it being positive, rather than it being a treasure to work for and earn, it is a greedy desire that is just constantly fed into. So through this, it actually acts like a foil to the story of the main game, and then we add in Kirin, a trainer who wants to become stronger, wants to be more confident, and wants to be smarter. Also, he can be like us as the player, all until he is lied to by us and his sister Carmine. He loses multiple times in Pokemon battles and eventually cracks. Kirin's desires well up and overflow. He punches the shrine, and as his extreme desires pour out and match the desires of the Loyal 3, they are all revived and back in full form. And just to drive this all home, when we get to the Blueberry Academy, Kirin has become a much stronger trainer with incredible strategies to exemplify his intelligence. He even changes his looks while doing so. All three of these transformations within himself aligning with the changes that the Loyal 3 went through. This also wouldn't be the only time that human energy is given to Pokemon through emotion. In fact, it happens all the time with not only normal Pokemon battles, but is also how many of our gimmicks even function. Because it is also stated that unless you have a strong connection with your Pokemon, you can't Mega Evolve them properly. Though, it is very interesting to see that despite not being their trainer, Kirin's emotions were able to transfer to them and revive them. We can finally talk about the three legendary beasts Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Though to really understand their origins, inspirations, and powers, we need to dig into the real-life inspirations of the Bell and Brass Towers. Once again, Bulbapedia gave me a phenomenal lead. As Ecruteak's city's Bell Tower is likely based on a mixture of two temples in the real-world city of Kyoto. One of them is a Buddhist temple in Kyoto known as Kinkaku-ji, which is covered in gold leaf. The likeness of a phoenix rests atop the tower. The other likely basis for the Bell Tower is a temple in Kyoto called Toji, East Temple. The temple's pagoda is the tallest in Japan, and it once had a twin temple in the west of Kyoto called Saiji. This is often reflected by the two towers being referred to as the East and West Towers. and just like in the legend of the Burn Tower in Ekutik's west and the Bell Tower in its east, the western temple of Saiji was burned long ago, while Toji still stands today. Saiji, since then, served as a historical site and has not been rebuilt, much like what we see with the Brass Tower. And more importantly, something that matches with this is the gym leader of Ekutik, Morty, who is a historian that finds great interest in not only the tower, but also aims to see Ho-Oh himself. He's also friends with Yusin, who aims to meet Suicune, as when he was young, his grandfather would tell him stories about Suicune. This would then lead him to study Johto's folklore and eventually be considered an expert in the legendary beasts, despite struggling to track down and meet Suicune. In terms of the real-life version, the Saiji Temple proceeded to burn down not once, but twice. Though I could not find the reason as to why it burned down, it proceeded to do so despite being in a location with poor water drainage, meaning there was plenty of water in the area, or rather, it did not drain to the soil very well. And I had to dig through a number of sources, but from Green Shinto, I bring you the kami that was said to be primarily worshipped at the Saiji Temple, something that may shed a massive light on why our legendary beasts were revived and why they wander throughout Johto and the world around so much. Dosojin refers to Shinto deities of the roads and borders, also called Zurokujin, and Sae no Kami or Sai no Kami, with Sae or Sai meaning to obstruct or keep out the evil spirits. These deities reside in stone markers found at village boundaries, in mountain passes, and along country byways. In urban areas today, Dosojin stone markers are often placed at street corners and near bridges to protect pedestrians. As the deity of the village border, the Dosojin wards off evil spirits and catastrophes, and protects the village from evil outside influences. As deity of the road, the Dosojin protects travelers, pilgrims, and those in quote-unquote transitional stages. And now we're jumping the proverbial gun here a bit, but this last part, or rather the entirety of the Dosojin, completely explains why our trio's story has them traveling not only through all of Johto while we play the game, but also why we see them in so many different regions and helping so many different people. More to this is the story of the Toji Temple. From Kyoto Kinkaku, which is oddly enough what seems to be a food and tourist establishment that promotes a very detailed history of this area, I have the following. Toji Temple, whose official name is Kyogokokuji Temple, is the head temple of the Shingon sect, founded by Kukai Kobodaishi in 823, or the year 823, don't know why I said it that way, for the purpose of protecting Heian Kyo. It is through this official name that it suggests that it played an important role in protecting the country through Buddhism in its founding. And I was able to confirm that it kinda did, because these two temples were the only Buddhist temples among a total of 3 that were allowed by the government at the time of their founding. Located in Minamiku within Kyoto City, it was located just east of Rajomon Gate in Hanko, hence it came to be called Toji Temple. The grounds are home to a national treasure 5-story pagoda, 54.8 meters high, known as the tallest wooden structure in Japan. There are many other important cultural properties in the temple, including the main hall, lecture hall, and dining hall. In particular, the lecture hall houses 21 Buddha statues, a 3-dimensional mandala, which expresses the universe view of esoteric Shingon Buddhism. The Kobo Market, otherwise known as the Antique Market, held on the 21st of every month, is bustling with visitors. In spring, the contrast between the cherry blossoms in the temple grounds and the 5-story pagoda is beautiful, and in autumn, the temple grounds are decorated with colorful autumn leaves, which explains why we see Ekutik in an eternal autumn. In 1994, it was registered as a World Heritage Site, as one of the cultural monuments of ancient Kyoto. And even today, it is a temple representative of Kyoto, visited by many worshippers and tourists. All of these descriptions we are getting, every detail we have is exactly as Pokemon has shown in official artwork and in episodes surrounding Bell Tower and within the games. And in the real world, this temple has suffered many fires, but have been rebuilt every single time, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, wink wink. Though the reconstruction after the Great Fire in 1255 was particularly important. Many of the buildings that can be seen today, such as the 5-story pagoda and main hall, were rebuilt during this period. There is only one instance in which we hear of the bell tower burning down within any version of Pokemon, and that is specifically within the movie Pokemon I Choose You, which is set in a different continuity from the rest of this series. Though, once again, from Green Shinto, I have the following last bit of information that will help set up the entire story of the Legendary Beasts and Ho-Oh's connection. The shrines don't have Shinto priests attached to them, though they do have rituals performed by Buddhist priests, who are in charge of the well-being of the kami and serving them offerings. Most of these shrines belong to the two esoteric sects, Shingon and Tendai, though there are often kami shrines too in Zen and Nichiren temples. The Pure Land sects tend not to have them. The magnificent wooden structures of Toji Temple are World Heritage Sites and guarded by two small shrines. One of the most interesting examples of shrines within a temple complex can be found in Kyoto's Toji Temple. Toji means Eastern Temple, and together with its counterpart Saiji, Western Temple, it was built to be a protective guardian of Heian-kyo, now known as Kyoto. The two temples stood near the southern entrance to the city, to either side of the mighty Rashomon Gate. So once again, we see all of these things through Pokemon, with the priests being the kimono girls. We have the two temples not only as a singular guardian, but as two separate guardians in the image of Ho-Oh and Lugia. And I tried to find what kami was primarily worshipped there, but I couldn't confirm anything, couldn't find anything concrete. Though a few different sources did mention the Yakushi Nyorai, the medicine Buddha, which symbolized healing and compassion, is often paid respects to there. This effectively gives us a kami of travels and a kami of healing, concepts that Lugia and Ho-Oh embody in parts of themselves. Alright, I hear you. You've made it this far, you deserve a reward. You're ready to hear about Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. We've already talked about how they embody Dosojin as they travel across the lands and waters of the world, but what were they before they died? Why were they saved, and what are their inspirations? Beginning with the Pokemon that represents the lightning that struck the Brass Tower on that fateful night, we have Raikou, a Pokemon that summons dark thunderstorm clouds and bounds across the lands with booming echoes of thunder at its every step. We can easily tie this to the kami of the thunder, known as Raijin, a powerful Shinto god of thunder, lightning, and storms. They are often depicted with taiko drums that they would beat in order to produce the boom of thunder. This is actually why we see so many characters like Enel from One Piece have a ring of drums around him as part of his design as an individual who casts lightning down upon others. The design even comes back into Pokemon with Thundurus, though instead of the drums, it just kind of has those little spike balls. I know what you might be thinking. Wouldn't Thundurus then be the Raijin? Yes, and in fact, Thundurus more accurately represents the Raijin than Raikou does, because it is deeply rooted in not just destruction and nourishment of the lands, but also agriculture as a whole. But that's a whole other story that I have yet to dig into with the forces of nature, and I swear one of these days I'm just going to start working on what I want to call the Legendary Origins series as I dig deeply into all of our legendary Pokemon. I technically have a number of them done in other videos, but I want it properly refined, like this one kinda is. But back on topic, if Raikou doesn't quite represent the Raijin, then what is it supposed to be? Well, that would simply be the Raiju, of which I bring you information of from yokai.com. A Raiju is the embodiment of lightning into an animal form. They had long, sharp claws and ferocious faces. Generally, they were thought to look like wolves, dogs, tanuki, or even weasels or cats. Far more fanciful forms existed too. Sometimes Raiju were said to look like little dogs. Sorry, I have a chihuahua and I just imagined her as a Raikou, just this tiny little skittish chihuahua as a god or pet to the god of lightning and thunder. Anywho, they would look like little dogs but with 4 rear legs and 2 tails. Sometimes they were said to look like insects or crustaceans. Others looked like miniature dragons. Even more exotic Raiju were then said to be chimerical monsters composed of many different animals. Again, now I'm imagining Raikou, but as a crab. Carcinization really do be going hard these days. Continuing on what they state, Raiju live in the sky, a world which was totally off limits to humans before the 20th century. Because of this, almost nothing can be said about their true nature or behavior. They ride bolts of lightning to Earth when thunder claps and create mayhem wherever they land, which explains the thunder hitting the tower. For seemingly no reason at all, they attack buildings, start fires, and cause mass destruction. Long ago, Raikou were seen as divine beasts, akin to the thunder gods, the Raijin. Nothing was known about them except they were fast, merciless, and deadly. Whenever lightning struck, people believed that the Raikou had been sent by the gods to punish them for some reason or another. And long ago, the Raikou was one of the most well-known and most feared supernatural creatures in Japanese folklore, yet today, it is relatively minor and practically unknown to the average person. Their drastic reversal is due to the advances in science during the 19th and 20th centuries. In the Edo period and earlier, lightning and other natural disasters were believed to be the work of the gods. Only gods had the power to shake the earth and send fire from the sky. Lightning strikes so quickly and so randomly that it is impossible to observe, but it has very observable effects. The terrible booms that shake the ground, the odd burn patterns on the things it strikes, and the fires that it ignites. In old Japan, when buildings were all made of wood and closely packed together, a single lightning strike could cause a lot of destruction. The damage caused by lightning was indiscriminate. It destroyed everything from peasant hovels to imperial palaces, and as such was rightly feared by all. Now, the next part is easily the most important, as we get the inspiration as to why people originally feared the 3 legendary beasts upon their revival, more so than what we just learned. Because during the Meiji period, society was rapidly transformed due to the influx of foreign science and technology. Yokai, like Raikou, were one of the first victims of this modernization. People were actively discouraged from holding on to superstitions because they were perceived as an embarrassment to the country. New understandings about electricity and lightning and the invention of the airplane explained away the Raikou's most defining features: its life in the unreachable sky, and the godlike power of lightning. Once those mysteries were gone, the Raikou had no more power over people's imaginations, and so it was quickly forgotten. And I couldn't find any stories of Raikou being born, just stories revolving around them. So you can take your own personal pick as to what Raikou originally was before it had died and been revived by Ho-Oh's power. Maybe with all these different animals it could have been, just maybe, the trio really were originally Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon, as people have always suspected. After all, the Kimono Girls all employ the evolutions as their partners, while also tending to the history and care of the towers, while sharing the story with all who come to Ekutique. It's a long-standing theory that is all but confirmed through even the shared abilities of the 2 separate trios of Pokemon. But how about we move on to Entei? A roar is all it takes for Entei to cause volcanic eruptions all around the globe. Rumor does state that it is thought to have been born from the eruption of the volcano, but rumor stands aside, as we know that Entei was revived from the dead just like the rest of our trio. With Shinto belief having strong inspirations from Chinese philosophy, primarily Confucianism and Taoism, and with their own beliefs receiving inspirations from India, we can actually trace Entei over to the Barong guardian spirit, or the Koma Inu. Both were effectively guardian lions, but Koma Inu can be traced to India, while Barong were more specifically Bali in terms of cultural origin. As such, it is pretty hard to deny that this would have been an inspiration, and I will actually focus more on the Barong because the Koma Inu is closer to Arcanine in terms of origins and inspiration. With the Barong, we find that it would often be depicted with a lion's mane and an ornate mask, much like how it seems Entei wears a mask of its own. They were said to be the balance between good and evil, symbolizing goodness and protection as they ward off misfortune and bring harmony. What shocked me when I first read into the Barong, though, is that it is brought into life by the Banapati Raja, a lion-like king of spirits that would serve as a guardian angel to children. And of course, Entei is created by Molly as her best friend, her father, and protector throughout the entire film. Oh, up until the end, I guess, technically. A perfect representation of the Barong and the Banapati Raja. In fact, it's even more interesting that we once again see that Entei's inspiration is created or brought to life rather than a being higher than it. Just like Raikou is not the Raijin, but rather the effective companion or pet known as the Raiju. So let's see what Suicune holds in store. What upper deity does it serve, or is it created by? I'll say now that Suicune is in my top 3 favorite Pokemon of all time. Not only do I have the beautiful print behind me that the microphone is currently blocking and I'm trying to fix right now, there you go, but I have also bought a duplicate of that as a mat here on my desktop that I bought a whole year later, and I will never find anything like this ever again. I actually had to go to a convention and found myself these 3 beautiful prints that separately have Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, and I won't show them all here because at some point I will have them properly displayed behind me, as I really need to do so with all the different art that I keep getting, you know. One day I'll have a more cohesive set, but that takes time and money, and we'll get there eventually. On to Suicune officially though, it is known as the embodiment of the northern wind, traveling alongside it and purifying the waters of the world with a singular touch. It is graceful, glides with elegance, and has some very interesting connections overall. It is known to be the closest to Ho-Oh out of the trio of legendary beasts, and even has a cooperative bond with the unknown, the secret to which has never really been fully explained, though I think I kinda have it solved. It is a mixture of the Fujin and a more benevolent version of the Kaze no Kami. In terms of the Fujin, it is a god of the wind that is commonly depicted wearing a leopard loincloth while carrying a bag of wind, though once again we get a more complete version of that Kami through the likeness of Tornadus, who even kinda has leopard skin. I would also argue then that the more accurate depiction would be through looking at the Kaze no Kami and flipping its original purpose on its head to create Suicune, something that Pokemon had done often and will continue to do when they find new inspirations. After all, in the story of Momotaro, Oni or demons were considered to be evil, while Momotaro, the Peach Boy, who had enlisted the help of a monkey, a dog, and a pheasant, was supposed to be a benevolent and good individual. But this whole story was flipped on its head, as Ogerpon, our Oni, was actually our hero within Pokemon. So, when we take that and reflect it here with Suicune, we once again get from yokai.com the following for the Kaze no Kami, who are formless, invisible evil spirits. Despite being invisible, they are usually portrayed in paintings as old, sickly, ape-like demons wearing ragged loincloths. They inflict suffering upon humans both through their control of the wind and through the illness that they spread. Kaze no Kami ride the wind, traveling from place to place in order to spread illness. They slip into homes through small cracks and crevices, sensing the temperature differences between the warmer inside air and colder outside air. When they encounter people, they exhale clouds of humid yellow breath, and any humans bathed in this toxic air will become sick. And while advancements in medicine eventually ended the belief in wind spirits as carriers of disease, the superstition is preserved in the Japanese word for the common cold, kaze, which translates to evil wind. Similarly, the phrase kaze niao, to encounter the wind, means to have bad luck or suddenly fall sick. So instead of a deathly wind, we have of course the healing winds that travel alongside Suicune. But there is one more piece to this story, as there is suspect that Suicune is inspired by the Qilin. This is a chimerical creature that seems to be a mixture between a horse and a dragon, but they are said to appear with the imminent arrival or death of an illustrious ruler. Though instead of the death of the ruler, it was the death of the legendary trio, and with the arrival of the ruler, the great phoenix that is Ho-Oh, they were revived, thus giving us our last connection as to why Suicune is the closest to Ho-Oh, and how the trio represent just a step below a greater power or greater kami within the world of Pokemon. But it doesn't stop there, because Suicune's connection with the unknown also means that it has a great connection to Arceus. The unknown are often being seen, or have been seen, by the community as the building blocks of the universe, and at the very least, I have accepted that they must be the watchers of the world as the eyes of Arceus on the mortal realm. I won't talk about that here, as I've talked about it plenty in my past videos. Instead, through the connection that Suicune then has to the unknown, and by extension Arceus, we find that the unknown may even report back and forth with Suicune, giving it some level of guidance as to where it is needed next. And so, with the arrival of Suicune, it sets the stage for the Emperor and our finale, Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is the literal rainbow emperor phoenix of Pokemon, depicted in statues of gold, celebrated and revered as a sacred Pokemon. It grants eternal happiness to those that witness it, the mystical fire it releases bears a heat unlike any other, and it has the power to revive other Pokemon, though there's something very special about the way that it revives. It has been posited by others that Ho-Oh acts as a larger flame that lights the burned out candle within another creature. It doesn't necessarily revive the Pokemon by truly giving life, but rather it kickstarts the flames once more and allows the Pokemon to use what exists within it again. Though the flame is definitely transformative, as it is a divine energy that plays outside of the rules of life and death. There are a ton of different ways in which Ho-Oh can be interpreted, but it is when we pair it with Lugia that we start to get a better picture of what they are meant to represent. Not just gold and silver, but rather as an individual known as Flora Coffee explained. We get Samsara and Nirvana. Samsara is the cycle of death and rebirth, reincarnation in a cycle as we see it through Buddhism, which we know is deeply interwoven into Pokemon, primarily when you get into that 4th generation onwards though, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But then we also add in Nirvana, which is breaking free from that cycle, which is exactly what Lugia does when the lightning strikes a tower and the tower is never rebuilt, nor does Lugia ever return. Instead, it rests deep under the water. This then leads me to Lugia's more prominent role as the Sea Spirit or Kami Guardian of the Sea, otherwise known as Watatsumi. We see this exemplified through what is named the Sea Spirit's Den in Kalos, which houses the legendary bird trio. So then if Lugia is Watatsumi in its more direct notable inspiration, then what is Ho-Oh by comparison? Well, it's literally Ho-Oh, but spelled differently. It would also be called the Feng Huang in China, which was often depicted with a dragon, that which Lugia would represent in its own right. Also, just to make things even easier, the name Feng Huang just means phoenix. It even had the head of a pheasant and the tail of a peacock, which Ho-Oh does have a more simplified version of a peacock's colorful array of feathers. And it is meant to represent fire, the sun, justice, obedience, fidelity, and the southern star constellations. It was said to appear in peaceful and prosperous times, and it would herald a new age as it descends from the heavens to the mortal realm. The Feng Huang was believed to control the 5 tones of traditional Chinese music and to represent the Confucian virtues of loyalty, honesty, decorum, and justice. And if trouble were to arise, it would disappear, and doing so would make it a symbol of disharmony, an omen in its own right. These ideals that Ho-Oh would then represent in parallel and inspiration from the Chinese phoenix would then be imparted onto our legendary beasts. And of course, by simply representing the phoenix, we have the classic representation of burning and rising anew from the ashes. This, in turn, was drawn from the sun itself, just like what we saw with the scarab beetle. The sun disappears and reappears every day, granting warmth and light while representing the cycle of life and death, thus explaining why we find Ho-Oh in front of that big, beautiful yellow ball in the sky as it flies during the intro to Pokemon. And that closes out the last video of 2025. As the year ends, may the new year grant you something new and beautiful. May any troubles you are currently handling be resolved, and may your life be enriched as you have enriched my own. While normally I would thank members of the channel, I want to simply let their names kind of, I would say, roll behind me, but I guess they're gonna roll on screen while I talk about something important to me. And I'm already tearing up. I have to be honest. I'm an emotional individual, so bear with me. I'm not gonna bawl, on camera, but I genuinely want to give my heartfelt thanks to all of you. This is my first full year primarily being a YouTuber, and I've learned so much and met so many people, including some new friends that I've grown very close with. And I've talked to so many of you, and I've felt so much more connected with the world than I have ever felt before. I don't feel lonely. I feel so much more fulfilled than I ever have in the past. YouTube as well has shared some statistics about the channel, and I want to share those statistics with you. The best video this year was my remake of the food chain, while the first video of the year was the Great Pokemon War Timeline, which is really weird considering we ended this year with Pokemon ZA, getting that game. You've all also left so many comments, and I could only find myself with enough time to respond to 475 of them. Somehow made it exactly 475, a nice little number, while hearting 2,739 of your comments, reading them and at least hearting them because I enjoyed what you said, or I liked your counter argument, or you provided insight or something. Maybe you shared a story. I don't know. As of the writing of this, I looked into it and we have received 2,372,099 views. We gained 11,085 subscribers, which that's insane. Since 2 years ago, I had less than 1,000, and now we have over 21,000. But what's more insane is the following. This year, you all amassed 1,088,000 182,222.5 watch hours. That translates to 123.5 years of watch time within a singular year. Somehow, you have collectively watched the channel so much that it hit a total, I'm going to say it again, of 123.5 years of time spent within a single year. And I am baffled. I'm baffled by that number. I will always partially struggle with this idea that I was once made fun of constantly for how much I talked, or how I talked, or how loud I was. It's also why I could be a little, I joke about it, I could be a little prickly sometimes. Yet so many of you have expressed that I am a comfort to you, that you fall asleep to my voice, and even crazier, that some of you have been inspired to educate yourselves because of me. Some of you have decided to seek careers in biology or ecology because of me, or have messaged me directly asking if you can use my research as a source for your own writing, all while calling me some professor, which I will never, ever truly actually call myself, because at the end of the day, I'm just some nerd who likes to write video essays and do deep analysis. But I thank you, genuinely, and I want to make a change as we slip into the new year. The channel icon will change to be more than just the, profile of Krylik. I want it to better reflect Pokemon as the focus of this channel, so don't freak out when you see that happen. In addition, I am making the goal of creating the first non-Pokemon video essay on the Earth to Krylik channel. I want to explore more topics of fiction and connect them to our world to inspire and educate people, and I realized that focusing entirely on scientific articles or stories was actually limiting myself, while I also realized I'm just not qualified or comfortable in doing so. I think that I can bring more people together, or bring information about the world to people better, if I use fiction and then bolster it with what has happened in the real world, history, religion, science, you name it. And I also want to experiment with some shorter videos here and there, though whether it'll be on this channel or another channel is something I intend to figure out, though I'm in no rush to do that. There are plenty of people who would love to know what I have to share, but simply don't have the time for a 2 or 3 hour long video. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop making multi-hour long videos. It's just, another access point for people. And it's going to take a lot of work, but I've made things work so far, though I genuinely mean it when I say I could not have done this without you. Whether you're brand new or a longtime viewer of this channel, it is literally impossible for me to have gotten this far without your support, whether it be through viewing, watch time, your kind and informative comments, or even your generous monetary support. It has bolstered me in my worst moments of depression or anxiety, and helped me push forward in an onward march with my head held high of making my dream a reality while providing you the quality that you deserve. And here I am getting emotional, even though I'm literally going to have another video next week, and it's just something special about, making the last video of this year to me, but I digress. So one final time, thank you. And as always, don't do anything I want to do, don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!